Let me officially welcome all of you to this webinar sponsored by the United States Catholic Mission Association featuring Father Tony Gittins on intercultural living, the what and the why. It is just a joy to have all of you here. Uh, I'm going to be your host. I'm Don McCrabb. I'm the Executive Director of the United States Catholic Mission Association. And in the background, working for us is Emma. Emma is our Zoom master, and she's taking care of taking care of the recording. And so if you have any technical questions, just put them in the chat, and Emma can address those for you. With that, I'd like to move into prayer. And so I'd like to invite Mary Beth to begin.
There is precious little acceptance in our society of the changes in our bodies brought about by sacrifice, by the giving of life to others. People want us to look unscathed, unscarred, without the sagging in our breasts, the stretch marks in our stomach, the lines of strain and struggle. We are to look ageless, timeless, the image of the lithe and slender. Where is the place for the beauty derived from love and developed through sacrifice?
Paul?
Prayer, risk being worn out. Where are the people who will celebrate the signs of someone who has given themselves to others through touch and tears and love unnumbered times? Who of you will join me in the risk of being worn out, being wrinkled, of being thrown away? We are not fools who give what we cannot keep, to give what we cannot lose. Part of a poem by Angie Andrews.
And let the church say amen.
Amen. Okay, I'll get rid of this.
Okay, so Tony, I'm going to now turn it all over to you. Stop sharing. And Tony, when you need anything, you just let us know and we'll put it up on the screen.
Okay, we'll do. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's okay. I've just discovered another little glitch. The original title for this was Intercultural Living, the what and the how, not the why. So today I'm going to look at the how. How might we approach intercultural living? So I'm going to do it in two pieces. The first piece is suggested three guidelines or three kind of general background contexts or statements. And then I'll look in the second part at some of the characteristics. So the first session or the first part of this is three guidelines for, and I can hear a typewriter clacking away in the background.
That's my bad.
It's okay. Okay, we can carry on, yeah? So the first guideline is that we are going to try to build a home, a new home together. That, in fact, is the title of a book by Jonathan Sachs, To Build a Home Together. And once you get into your mind the understanding or the image of what a home is, you know very well that it's not the same as an institution, it's not the same as a hospital or a prison or a retirement home. A home is an organic, ever-changing, growing, modifying, expanding, contracting, living and dying residence where people of different stages in life and different statuses in life can find that they are in an environment that is comfortable to them and supportive of them. So we're going to try and build a home together, not just a religious institution or a religious community. It's quite different. So a home is made up of one family, but of very, very different members. And the members of the family have very, very different needs, very different experiences, and very different strengths and weaknesses. And that's the kind of context that we're going to look at when we think about how can we build this kind of unit together out of the raw materials that we've got, the young and the old, the healthy and the sick, the strong and the weak, you know, the neophytes and the wisdom figures, and so on and so forth. So a home is not a monarchy, but nevertheless it has an authority. It has a power structure, if you like. And the home we build together as an intercultural community needs to have all of those things. It needs to have some structure. It needs to have some authority. It needs to have some accountability. And it needs to have some variety. But I think for me, the word that is most helpful is the word organic. In other words, the home changes literally on a day-to-day basis. We don't know what's going to happen to any of the individuals who live in a family home on any given day. One of us might be feeling perfectly fine and in control, and suddenly something happens and there's an accident, and we all have to kind of come together and work. So that first point, that we are going to try and build a home together, is unquestionably a faith commitment. It is not just driven by pragmatic considerations or by financial considerations. It is a religious home that we're trying to build together, with all of the implications of that. The second of the three guidelines then is that we need to discover the dignity of difference. And the difference issue is an issue that has dogged many religious communities and faith communities, including the Christian community, over the centuries. We've tended to look at difference, you know, with a kind of suspicion or disapproval or something. If everything works according to the way I operate it, and if everybody agrees with me, then I assume that we'll move forward comfortably. But if there is difference, and there is difference of opinion and difference of background and difference of this, that, and the other, then we tend to get threatened by that and may very well overreact. So the second of the guidelines for an intercultural community is that we have to try and see with the eyes with which God sees, namely that difference is good. Difference is a creation of God. God created the world, which is a world of immense variety. Just look at the night sky photographs that we see these days. It is incomprehensible to me. Or look at the microscopic photographs of tiny little things that we simply cannot see with the naked eye. And we see the difference, the differentiation, all goes together to make creation. So the second of the point of the guidelines is that we have got to discover the dignity of difference. We've got to not simply tolerate difference. That's not good enough. We have got to actually live with difference, and we have got to be enriched by difference. Just as we hope that some of our little insights here and there, or little bits of wisdom that we may have accumulated, may be helpful to other people, so we should think that other people's life and other people's experience, vastly different than ours though it may be, can and should contribute to our understanding of what it means to be human, and what it means to be in the world, and what it means to live with a spirituality of difference, a spirituality of complementarity, and so on and so forth. So again, I leave you to work through some of that in terms of the implications. Which leads us to the third of the three guidelines, which is that we need to rethink the way we think. The problem or the challenge or the difficulty or the reality of culture is that it teaches us how to think. And the people who are responsible for teaching us how to think, or are our peers or our superiors, but basically people who come from the same kind of world of meaning, the same kind of world of values and of morality that we do. and they try to pass on to us the accumulated wisdom of our culture, including, of course, our religious and intellectual culture, and that they hope that they will be passing on something that we will pick up on. But at the same time, each one of us, as we go through adolescence, are reassessing what we've got from our wisdom figures. And sometimes we think that our wisdom figures are very old and passé. And sometimes we think that our wisdom figures are full of wisdom. And so we will try to assess the information and the example that we have received from the people who have gone before us, but rework it in terms of our own insights and our own experience and our own hopes and fears and so on and so forth. So the most difficult thing for us as human beings is to rethink the way we think, because the way we think stabilizes us, generally speaking, and we will tend to only rethink or change the way we think if it accords with our own assumptions and principles and so on, our priorities. There is a prayer that I think we may finish with today that I used the last time, and it concludes by saying that we repent not by feeling bad, but by thinking differently. And that's the issue, that it's considerably easier to feel bad and then to not do very much about it than it is to think differently. So this call to intercultural living is quite clearly a call to conversion. It's a call to rethink our faith and our hope and our charity. And I'll give you an astonishing quotation in a few minutes. So we have to rethink our tradition, our conventions, and so on and so forth. And we have to understand that every single one of us is not only racist or biased, but ethnocentric. And ethnocentric is really the kind of cover word for all of these things. We think out of and we see out of our own perspective. We see through our own eyes, not through somebody else's. We hear through our own ears, not through somebody else's. We smell through our own olfactory senses, not through somebody else's. So we all have a focus, a center, and we are ethnocentric in the sense that our perceptions of the world start off from where we are. But what we have to learn is that other people also are ethnocentric. And ethnocentrism is a standard feature of humanity. There's nothing wrong with ethnocentrism, provided it doesn't get out of hand. And it gets out of hand when we think that the way we think is the only way to think. Or we think that the way we think is the way other people should think. Or tragically, we think that the way we think is the way God thinks. So we have to work through all of that and try and understand that we are called for a revolution in thinking in order to focus our minds not on the way others think simply, but on the way God thinks. Now, I'm going to try and put up the first of our visuals today, and it's a quotation from Walter Hollenweger. And if I see it up on the screen, then I will explain it to you and contextualize it for you. Don, do you have that? Are you in process?
Yes, and it's coming up.
Okay, fine. Walter Hollenweger is now dead, and he was the person who probably contributed more than anybody else to an understanding of Pentecostalism. He was, if I remember rightly, a Methodist. But he has this quote, which I have always found extremely challenging, and which I and others that I've tested it on also find not only challenging, but that it's very easy to misunderstand. So let me just read it for you. Evangelization, by which he means the whole of our faith life as people who are gospel spreaders. Evangelization is martyria. It is martyrdom. It is the witness to our faith. That does not mean primarily the risking of possessions and life, but rather that we, each of us, gambles, as it were, with our understanding of belief in the course of our life, our ministry, our mission. We, so to speak, submit our understanding of the world and of God and of our faith to the test of dialogue. We have no guarantee that this understanding of faith will emerge from that dialogue unaltered. On the contrary, how can anyone expect that the person who is listening to us should be ready in principle to change their life if we are not notionally prepared to submit to the same discipline? Now, that is a very, very challenging statement. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. But second line, the evangelist, we gamble, as it were, with our understanding. We do not gamble with belief itself, and we certainly do not gamble with God. We gamble with our understanding, because we have to realize that our understanding is a conventional understanding, a limited understanding, as anybody else is, because we are not God. So our understanding of God, in fact, is not God. It is our understanding of God. And if I worship my understanding of God, I am worshiping an idol. That is idolatry. So I've got to understand that my understanding of God needs to be modified by God, by my faith, by my exposure to other people, by my ongoing conversion. So I have to be willing to gamble with my provisional understanding of God, so that God can open up my provisional understanding of God to a broader understanding of God, even though I shall never understand God as God is. That's hard enough. But I've also got to gamble with my provisional understanding of my faith and of the world itself, in other words, of other people, for the same reasons. Because my faith is not it's a provisional. It's a provisional understanding of God and who God is and what God does. So I have got to understand that my understanding of the faith needs to be open to challenge, open to growth. And that is one of the features of intercultural living: open to difference, open to a variety of perceptions, a variety of backgrounds and experiences. And of course, the world. An intercultural community is comprised of people who come from many different worlds, many different experiences, many different worlds of knowledge, and so on and so forth. And I've got to be willing to gamble with my provisional understanding so that I can be open to all of that. So I'm going to ask God to help me to gamble with my understanding, so that by the grace of God and by the ongoing conversion in and through the community of intercultural persons, that I may be more vulnerable to the transcendent. I may be more open to who God is and to who people are, so that my understanding of God, my faith, people, the world, mission, and so on can be expanded. And unless I do that, I'm not being a fully human being. But one of the better ways to do that is through the challenge of intercultural community, where I've got many different perceptions, many different understandings of God and the world, and so on, right in front of me. Okay, so those are three guidelines that we can perhaps start with. And I'm going to move through now some common characteristics of intercultural living. The first one is what is called a common project. We need to have a common project, but a common project of which I speak is not just a rational thing. It's not just we have to all agree that we've got to do certain things to get food on the table, or to get the electricity fixed, or to keep the house running, and so on. The common project, which originates in a French statement, phrase, le projet commun, the French word for that, doesn't just mean a rational project. It means a vision. It means an understanding of what we're about. So a common project for us would be, if you like, a vision statement that we have in common, but something that is alive, something that's not just written down, that we have to go and look up in order to remind ourselves of. It's not got to be complicated. It's got to be something that inflames us and infuses us. Now, I'm going to show you a little visual here, and there's going to be three parts on it. The top part is going to be this notion that we have to have a vision. And the bottom part, I'm just going to write down the word structure. And the notion is, or the idea is here, that we all of us should have a vision, but we don't just stare up into the sky. We have a structure in our daily lives, and the purpose of structure is to feed the vision and to keep the vision alive. So if you want to follow me just for a few minutes, I'll explain this. All of us have a structure, and we can identify two kinds of structure. The first one is our own bodily structure, our own individuality, our own person. So each religious community and each intercultural community starts off with a structure, an actual community, people. And those people are real people. Some of them are strong, some of them are young, some of them are strong, and some of them are old. Some of them are physically attractive, active, and physically, So our structure has got to be identified. Who are we? How many of them are we? What is our potential? What is beyond our potential? We are not 150. We are 5 or 6 or 7 or 22. We are not of an average age of 20 or 30 or 40. We are of an average age of something else. So be realistic, identifying the structure that keeps the vision alive, and try and ensure always that the structure that we have is focused on the vision in a realistic kind of way, but at the same time in a faith kind of way. So the first kind of structure that keeps the vision alive, and without which there is no vision, is our physical community, the individuals who live in the community, the human beings. The second kind of structure that we have to think about is our physical structure, the buildings, the money, the bank balance, the modifications to our buildings, but the physical structure. What do we have? How much property? How much physical property do we have? How much real estate? What is the purpose of our real estate? What is the purpose of our bank balance? It's the same as the purpose of our human beingness, namely to keep the vision alive. If our human beingness, if our human capacity, our human group is not keeping the vision alive, it must either modify, be modified, or die. And similarly, if our physical structures, including our bank balance and our properties, are not serving to keep the vision alive, then they too have to be modified because they're not doing their job. So there has to be a constant attention to the structures that serve the vision. The individuals in our communities, how are we serving the vision? We're doing it differently today than we did 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, because our bodies are different than they were. In some senses, we are stronger than we were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. In other senses, physically, mentally perhaps, we are weaker. So how do we continue to be faithful to the vision whilst dealing with the fact that our structures are changing? Our numbers are falling perhaps. Our properties are not what they used to be. Our big mother houses are no longer needed in the same way as they were. So we have to try and ensure always that the structure does not serve itself. It serves to keep the vision alive. But again, what we do is weekly or monthly or annually, we have meetings to try and ensure that we are staying focused on our common project, our vision. And to that end, we create strategies. Structures produce strategies. And again, the strategies are produced in order to keep the vision alive. And if the strategies are no longer serving to keep the vision alive, then the strategies, like the structures, need to be modified, reassessed, moved away from. So for example, general chapters are the time when we create new structures for the period of 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years or whatever it is. But if we have created some new policies, some new structures, and within 3 weeks or a month, something catastrophic or at least totally surprising happens, like, for example, the invasion of Ukraine, the structures that we had set in place are no longer going to keep the vision alive. We need new structures to serve the ongoing vision. And we live in a time when constantly faithfulness to the structures for the sake of being faithfulness to the structures is not faithfulness to the vision. This is one of the things that Pope Francis is trying to address all the time, to try and renew the structures, because the structure's purpose is to keep the vision alive. So that's the first of the characteristics, the most important, in fact. The second one is individual commitment. And to that end, we need to find out within our communities, local communities or provincial or general communities, whether we have a critical mass of energy to move forward with intercultural community living. The way we do that is to try and find out individually how many people have the energy and the commitment, how many people are resisting, and how many people just don't know what's going on and whether they have any part in it or not. And we've got to carefully assess and add up the percentages so we find out whether in balance we have a critical mass, which means to say more energy for the project or for the vision of intercultural community than the energy that is against it or negative. And to this end, we've got to remember that some of our greatest energy producers are in fact the people with the least physical energy. In other words, the older and the oldest of the community, who are the wisdom figures, or should be the wisdom figures, who have the capacity to move forward in faith to the future, having moved forward in faith through the past over the last 50 or 60 years. So such people, the older, the wisdom figures, the infirm and so on, cannot and must not be neglected. They have to be conversed with and encountered and taken very seriously, because they are the ones who can be saying, I will be praying with you, I will be behind you, I will support you, and so on and so forth. And their moral support and their spiritual support can be as every bit as important as the physical support or the intellectual support of some of the younger members. So some of the younger members may be the most resistant, and some of the older members may be the most persistent and assistant on intercultural living. But everybody must be assessed in some kind of way. We cannot simply have people who are, non-committal. Everybody's got to be committal positively or negatively. If you can do that, and you need to do that by all kinds of means, subtle and perhaps less subtle, to find out, because some communities will actually and frankly not be able to generate a critical mass of positive commitment to intercultural living. In which case, what usually happens is either there is a split in the community, and those who have the energy will move to refound, or they will be a kind of a bogging down and a lack of inspiration and aspiration in the community, and the community will just fade out ultimately. So that's the second one. The third one is that there has got to be not only mutual awareness and use of difference, but mutual tolerance. And I'm going to go back to Hollenweger's reflection on that, call your attention to that, and we'll put it up later so that those people who want to copy it can copy it. But also I'm going to call you back to Evangelii Gaudium, the Joy of the Gospel, to paragraph 33, which is also quite inspirational from Pope Francis. He says, pastoral ministry is in a missionary key, seeks to abandon the complacent attitude that says we've always done it this way. I invite everyone to be bold and creative in rethinking the goals, the structures, not to say the strategies, the style and the methods of evangelization in their respective communities. A proposal of goals without a communal search for the means of achieving them will prove inevitably illusory. I encourage everyone to apply the guidelines found in this document generously and courageously. Do not walk alone, but rely on each other as brothers and sisters, especially under the leadership and a wise, realistic, and pastoral discernment. So that's the third one: mutuality, mutual indebtedness, mutual tolerance. The fourth characteristic would be a forum. And a forum is an opportunity for people to get together and share their hopes and their concerns. It is not a chapter of faults like we used to do in the old days. It is an opportunity for people to share with each other the positive values of an intercultural experience. So my suggestion would be that you would meet as a community in a relatively, casual kind of way as well. And each person would be given the opportunity to say something positive about their experience of community, something that they're finding enriching, challenging, difficult perhaps, but positive. And after that, then each person is invited, or should be invited, to say something which is not a criticism, not pointing the finger at somebody else, but which is an opportunity to articulate something that they are finding particularly difficult in the intercultural exchange. It could be the smells from the kitchen. It could be the noise from the music. It could be all manner of things that we don't very often think about until it comes down to ourselves. And those kinds of things can be major issues in adjusting to intercultural life. So a forum for venting our frustrations and acknowledging our enjoyment and our gratitude is very, very important. And it would be an opportunity to feel free to talk about our concerns and our challenges. In other words, it really would be communication. The fifth characteristic I want to identify is the fact that nobody can have authentic faith that is not embedded in culture in some fashion or other. Faith and culture are part and parcel of each other. They are intimately connected. Consequently, an intercultural community is going to manifest the fact that people coming from different cultures will have different articulations and expressions of their own faith. Different incarnations of their faith, because faith is going to be extruded through, for better or worse, through culture. Some of my worst failings are identified through my cultural behavior. Some of my graces and gifts, if I have any, are manifested through my culture. So culture is always a composite of sin and grace. And my faith is always soured by sin and enhanced by grace. So we have to learn that faith and culture are part of each other. And we cannot just drop or assume that we're going to have one single culture, one bland single culture in an intercultural community. We are working toward living together as cor unum et anima una, but not simply one massive blob of many different people. We have individuality, we are different, and we have different ways of living our faith. And intercultural community has got to find ways of accommodating that. Now, there are so many others that I want to get to, which would include marginality and understanding that we are marginal. It would include things like some cultures are much more ego-focused or egocentric or based upon the individual, whereas some cultures are much more sociocentric or based upon the group. And that's a huge influencer in intercultural living. If I come from a very highly individualistic culture, and I find that people in my community are coming from very strongly sociocentric and community-based cultures, there are going to be big, big challenges. So there are other things that we need to work on. And perhaps one of them is that in an intercultural community, everybody in a sense is marginal. And yet, paradoxically, there should be no strangers in an intercultural community. If I am a cross-cultural person, I am a stranger in somebody else's culture. They are all at home, I'm not. But in an intercultural community, we are all, in a sense, strangers, and yet none of us are strangers because we are all at home. And that is the paradox of the fact that the human person universally is all different and all the same. Human beings are all different. No two of us are the same. And yet human beings are all the same. We are one. We are one race, one human race. And intercultural community has got to bring the challenge to the foreground and learn skills and virtues. And it's not just virtues, and I'm not minimizing virtues, but it is skills too. And if you pursue this, whether in my book or some of the great literature that's come out in the last 5 or 6 years, you can identify lists, further lists of skills and virtues. And I'll stop there because that leaves us 20 minutes at least for some kind of conversation or sharing. Yeah. Okay, back to you, Don.
Tony, thank you very much. It was very stimulating. So let's go ahead and begin with our Q&A with Tony. If you notice, you should have the ability to raise your hand. And so I'm trying to just scan or you can put your question in the chat. Maybe if you just put your question in this chat, then what I can do is I can identify you, and then you can unmute yourself and you could ask your question. So feel free to raise your questions in the chat, and then I will call on you to share your question with Tony. So questions. I always have to take a deep breath. I'm finding myself needing a little bit of time to digest everything that you said, Tony. That was very rich. Thank you very much.
Virgil Petermeyer, I see his hand is waving.
Oh, okay, go ahead, please. Unmute yourself.
Okay. My question to you, Tony, is how much does one also take into consideration the surrounding populace? We're living here in Phoenix, and much of it is Hispanic, and inside it's American and Congolese and Indonesian, and our liturgies are all public. So liturgically, there are some considerations there too. But could you say something about what attention an intercultural community makes of the surrounding populace with whom they're also relating?
Thanks, Virgil. This is a very important issue. And in a certain kind of way, I've tried to avoid it, or at least what I've tried to do is to separate it from internal intercultural communities and external intercultural communities. I'm concentrating much more on internal, but the dynamics are critically different, and there is some overlap. So let's just identify, first of all, that within the intercultural community, by which I mean primarily a religious community, okay? Mm-hmm. The things that I've been talking about apply primarily to them. But then there is the surrounding context, the surrounding environment. And the difference between the two is largely a question of intentionality. Inside your own community, if you are truly committed to intercultural living, you should have already discovered that everybody in the community, or virtually everybody in the community, there could be some people who drag their feet, but typically you should have a consensus within the community that everybody is in this together. And that's why we're talking about building a family, building a home together. But between you and the people in Phoenix, you're not building the same kind of home together. And they don't necessarily have the same kind of intentionality that you do. So there are all kinds of things that can be said. And a lot of things that have been previously said about multicultural living are more applicable to that kind of external situation. But when I started working on intercultural living, it was with a view primarily to looking at within the community, whether the local community or the international religious community. So that's all I can say at the moment, except to acknowledge that your question is entirely appropriate, but intentionality is one of the variables there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Russ had a question that he put in the chat. Russ, you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it?
Okay, yeah. Tony, I was just wondering about the connections between what you're saying here and the developmental stages, as you mentioned, individuals and groups. Individuals go through stages. You mentioned wisdom figures at one part,
Right,
and then but groups also, go
Yeah.
through their culture and
Yeah.
their ethnic thing. How do you, is there ways you can help us with that?
Well, just to acknowledge again that what you're saying is true. If I go back to the idea of an organic family, there may be teenagers in that family, and there may be little babies in that family, and there may be some, grown adults who've got jobs, and they all live in the same family, and they've got to somehow accommodate. My sister, this is just an autobiographical thing. My sister is going to have her 60th birthday this week, and she is by far the youngest in our family. And we had a big Zoom last week, and some of the very older people in the family were talking about when she was a baby. I was in the novitiate. My younger brothers and sisters were bringing her up. They were, changing diapers and stuff like that. And we were talking about how they, created this organic community. My father died, and my little baby sister that needed to be brought up by her older siblings. And so I think what I want to just simply acknowledge in what you're saying, Ross, is we've got to be like a family, aware of unforeseen things and aware of changes, and aware that there are people in our family who are not only immature, but also very mature and very wise. So we're not all the same, and we cannot all be treated as the same. And this is one of the things that is becoming increasingly visible in intercultural communities, where we are not all considered as uniform. Like in the past, we used to be all wearing the same religious habit, and there was a tendency to treat everybody the same. Now, in an intercultural community, that is not the case. And without being, picking favorites and mollycoddling people, there's got to be a whole lot more sensitivity to differences and to maturity in a community, and that's absolutely important. That's one of the reasons why I put a lot of emphasis on the formation period, especially the novitiate, where this whole thing has to get set in motion. And if it's not set in motion in today's novitiates, it won't happen in tomorrow's communities.
Tony, I just want to build on your answer there. At one point, you mentioned how your family got together by Zoom, and that triggered for me the question: this new technology that's available to us, a wide variety of technologies in terms of social media, iPhones, Zoom, those kind of things. In what way do you see this as helping create an intercultural community, and in what way will it distract from creating an intercultural community?
All of the above. I would say, if you think back 40 or 50 or 60 years in religious communities, the telephone was a danger. It was a problem. Who gets to use the telephone? Oh, this is a newfangled thing. Will we ever get used to it? Another little tiny bit of a generation before that, motor cars, were a problem. Every generation has new things. Every generation has new technology. Some people are going to take it with their mother's milk, and other people are going to reject it as if it's poison. And so there's got to be some way of saying, okay, how can we use these things the better to communicate? And sometimes we have to say that we have abused technology dreadfully in terms of our comforts. And sometimes we have to say that we've used technology beautifully in terms of our increasing spread of communication and availability to other people. Every new step in electronic developments and things carries both positive and negative connotations for selfishness and for altruism, for me and for us.
Thank you very much, Tony. Any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat right now, but if anybody wants to just raise their hand or wave, please, any other questions? We only have a few more minutes with Tony. Just looking here.
I'll tell you one question I have for some of you. If you could, I don't know, disappear yourselves, but keep some kind of a sign of you. I'd like to know how many of you, involved in this webinar, are positive about your own commitment to intercultural living, and how many of you are still not sure at all, or feel some kind of negativity. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I'd really like to know, do we have critical mass here?
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you please explain about the difference between the interculturality and mutual cultural?
Oh, not right now, but what I would say very, very simply is that most of you today live in a multicultural society. I'm not talking about a religious community. I'm talking about a society. Multicultural simply means people of many cultures in the same area or so on. And the way I define it or describe it is multicultural is people living together separately. In other words, you may live with people of many different languages and cultures, but you don't learn their languages and you don't learn their cultures, whether you're living in Chicago or Shanghai. But in an intercultural community, you are living together. So there's a commitment and intimacy, and that's the difference, the degree of commitment, intentionality.
Okay, thank you. Now, is it possible to repeat, in short, the guidelines of number 3, when you are talking about the guidelines number 3? Yes.
Number 3 guidelines?
Yes.
About rethinking the way we think?
Yes.
Well, I think the best way for me to do that is to encourage you in your own communities and personally to think about the way you think. What do you think? Talk about politics, talk about sex, talk about religion, talk about anything you like, and see how different you are in the community.
Okay.
Talk about, what makes you tick and what makes the other people in the community tick. And you begin immediately to realize that the way you think is not the way other people think. In some cases it is. In some cases you think very strongly along other people's lines. But in other cases, the things you don't talk about are precisely the things that you're afraid to talk about because you don't agree about.
Okay, thank you.
Paul Mason raised a question, Tony, about how do we deal with members of our communities who reject interculturality. Paul, you want to say anything more about that? And while you're doing that, I'm going to be launching a poll that raises the 2 questions that Tony asked, or the question that Tony asked.
Okay.
Are you committed to interculturality or not?
First, I would like to say that I'm committed. But I also recognize my faults. I mean, because it's not easy sometimes. And to recognize, and I like washing the dishes. We have different ways of washing the dishes.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
So, but how do we deal with people who reject this?
Well, I think this is one of the most delicate things. But people who reject it may reject it in principle or may reject it simply because they feel left out. So one of the questions is to try and find out why they reject it. If they reject it, can you coexist? It's like, can you live in a family with a teenager who does not want to be part of the family, but wants to live there? So, can you live together with differences without, destroying each other? And then the second question is there something you can do to come closer together? I'm astonished, well, kind of in a sense, not astonished, but very gratified to see that 100% of people are saying, yes, I'm in on this, whatever it means, even though we don't know where the future lies or how to get there quite. There's a massive positivity about that. But this question about what if you have negativity, there are things that can be done in different communities, especially today, where people can in fact find a way to live, which is not necessarily in a community where everybody is committed to intercultural living. There's a lot of independent living in religious communities today, and there are ways in which people who don't want to be in the community can find a way that is acceptable, tolerable, let's say, not the best practice, but tolerable, to them and to others. It can be worked out, but you need to know people who are really negative or very, very not unsure need to be given voice so that they are then given some encouragement, and then you can resolve the question one way or the other. I know of communities in the last 20 years where this has come to a head and the community has in fact split. And the people who didn't want to change have stayed where they want to be. And the people who do want to change have started again. And it's not easy, but it happens. It happens, has always happened all the way through the Christian churches from the beginning of time. There is fission and there is fusion. There is fusion and there is fission. Some people go another way. It's the breakup of the single community into many communities. Can we live in unity, if not in uniformity?
Tony, thank you very much for that. One more question. We're about out of time, and we do want to close with prayer, the prayer that Tony mentioned earlier. And of course, we have a few other little surprises for you here. One more question. I did notice that I hope I'm pronouncing your name relatively correctly. Nanika Udu mentioned in the chat that she feels that intercultural community is the oxygen the church and the religious life need at this time. Do you want to add to that? Perhaps not at this point.
I would love to endorse it and just say that sounds like a great image. You know, some of us are being starved of oxygen. Some of us are hyperventilating, and some of us are breathing deeply.
Thanks for that, Tony. I just want to say I have to say that being the dad of teenagers. I do know exactly what you're talking about when people do not want to cooperate. So I would just encourage people, one, just be mindful of your own expectations. In that sometimes, you kind of say, oh, I expect people to do things this way, and just to raise that in terms of your expectations. And two, there's always kind of a threshold where a person needs to cross over. And you can't make them cross over. You can invite them to cross over, but they have to decide when to cross over. And part of that is, in God's time. It takes what it takes.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. People at Liturgical Press have given us a discount on Tony's book. It's just called Living 20. Living 20. So you can go and order that from Liturgical Press, and you will get a discount and free shipping. So we wanted you to make sure that you knew about that. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't pass the bucket, if you will, pass the basket. If you are able to send a few dollars to the United States Catholic Mission Association, obviously that supports our efforts to provide these kind of meetings, these kind of gatherings, these kind of webinars. $10, $20, $100 if you got it, but yeah, it would be really deeply appreciated. At this point, probably the best way to do that is just to throw a check in the mail, or you can call us and talk to Nicole, and she should be able to do that over the phone. And then that's the kind of the end of our slideshow, but I do want to bring up that closing prayer that Tony talked about. And then Tony, why don't you pray this for us today?
Okay, sure, be glad to. Jesus says that in his society there's a new way for people to live. You show wisdom by trusting people. You handle leadership by serving. You handle offenders by forgiving. You handle money by sharing. You handle authority by gentle firmness. You handle enemies by loving. And you handle violence by suffering. In fact, you have a new attitude toward everything, toward everybody, toward nature, toward the state in which you happen to live, toward women, toward refugees, asylum seekers, marginalized and homeless people, toward all and every single thing. Because this is a Jesus society, and you repent not by feeling bad, but by thinking and acting differently.
And let the church say amen.
Amen.
Well, once again, I just want to thank all of you for coming and participating in this webinar. And I certainly want to thank you, Tony. Your wisdom,
Welcome.
your engagement, your enthusiasm, your commitment, it's just infectious. So
Good.
thank you very much. You will be receiving a follow-up email from us with the link to the recording that Emma has done so expertly, and there'll be further information. And USCMA is going to be coming back together after Easter just to explore how we can be supportive of each other in our efforts to advance intercultural living. With that, God bless you and have a happy and holy week next week and a joyous celebration of Easter. This is a production of USCMA, dedicated to mission animation through the engagement and renewal of Catholic missionaries. USCMA is funded by its members and generous donors. To learn more, visit USCMA's website at www.uscatholicmission.org. Thank you and God bless.